What seemed like an ordinary camping day with friends turned into something completely out of Zack's control when he walked into the forest to gather firewood. The whims of the multiversal system treated this man with all the cruelty they could muster, ripping him from his reality without any warning. The first thing he faced was that unsettling blue screen, the isekai screen, while his mind was already beginning to question whether there had been something suspicious in the brownies he had eaten before leaving camp. Calling out for his friends did nothing. Then, without any logical explanation, a system error erupted before him, demanding he roll a guide to save his own life. Placed face to face with the evil monster Ninetails, Zack only breathed a sigh of relief when the system intervened and offered an alternative, a dice roll wager in place of direct combat. The highest number would win, simple as that. Except his odds ranged from 1 to 100, while the creature ceiling reached a staggering 100,000. The odds were completely stacked against him. Even so, Zachary rolled the die, watching the number spin before his eyes. The result was an impressive 96, practically the limit his luck would allow him to reach, but against a near-divine entity capable of hitting 100,000, it seemed laughable. Convinced he was about to lose everything, he mentally said goodbye to his family, already coming to terms with the end that seemed inevitable. Instead of surrendering to despair, however, he bet on the one thing he still had left, the possibility of a turnaround. And fate, absurdly, decided to cooperate. The monster rolled a measly 91, Zack's number 1, and the all-powerful creature fell before him, transferring its powers directly into the human's body in an overwhelming sequence of level-ups that all came at once. When he finally opened his eyes, he was back in the same forest. Nothing made sense. He knew he needed to find his friends as soon as possible, but the surrounding environment was completely unrecognizable, as if the world itself had been remodeled. The system confirmed this suspicion by informing him that reality was transforming to merge with the multiverse. Zack was still trying to convince himself he was simply trapped in a particularly horrible nightmare. Pulling himself together, he located the trailer and ran to it, hoping to reunite with the group. He called out to everyone, but no voice answered. His friends had disappeared, and in their place, a demonic dog was tearing through the camp supplies. The creature locked eyes with the human and roared before launching itself at him with terrifying speed. Zack did not back down. He wielded the axe and cut the beast's chest head-on, absorbing a wound to the shoulder in the process. The monster hit the ground with a thud, making the man wonder how he had become so much stronger. Then it clicked. The system, the Ninetails, the dice roll, all of it had been real. Still holding on to the hope that his friends were alive somewhere, he couldn't even look for them because the demonic dog charged again, this time with a powerful claw. He dodged at the last second, sending the creature crashing violently into the trailer. The monster's speed was brutal, but its mobility was terrible. There was the opening he needed. Zack began circling the area, leading the beast through the forest as it repeatedly collided with obstacles due to its inability to curb its trajectory with precision. Calculating every step, he made the monster charge at full speed towards a cluster of rocks and sidestepped at the exact moment, forcing the creature to slam into the boulders. The collision caused real damage, but it wasn't enough to bring it down. Taking advantage of the beast's blind spot, Zack drove the axe straight into the animal's spine, which snapped on impact, blow after blow, dozens of them. The monster was reduced to nothing, and the way this man executed each attack made it seem as though death itself had taken human form. The kill yielded 100 Nexus coins, bringing the confrontation to a definitive end. The walk back to the trailer was marked by heavy steps and blood dripping to the ground. Upon arriving, no one was there to greet him. Zack's body reached its limit, and he passed out right at the entrance of the vehicle. When he woke up, 2 suns lit the sky above him. The headache was the kind that comes from processing too much information at once. Looking at his own hands covered in blood spatters, he grabbed his phone trying to at least confirm the time, and was met with another shock. 3 days had passed while he was unconscious, the classic 3-day coma that seemed like a bureaucratic requirement of the isekai. His greatest concern at that moment was the whereabouts of his friends, especially his girlfriend Hannah. In the 3 days he had been out, none of them had given any sign of life, even though everyone's luggage was still there, untouched. Zack began to mentally prepare for the worst possible scenario. If they hadn't come back by then, they probably weren't coming back at all. Questions multiplied without answers, but an unexpected observation broke the cycle of thoughts. His wounds had completely disappeared. Despite the volume of blood lost, his body was functioning normally, as if nothing had happened. With no cell signal and the car battery dead, he was effectively isolated in the middle of the forest. Zack approached the tree and climbed its branches to try to get a broader view of the situation, but what he saw from above left him frozen. An endless forest in every direction, mountains all around, and the most alarming detail, the place was surrounded by water. He was trapped on an island. There was no prize waiting for him on the other side. Furious at the system for destroying his life, he called up the interface and was caught off guard by a blue screen titled "Born for Carnage," a title that increased all his stats by 10%. Others followed: Supreme Reaper with an additional 10% bonus and 5 base points, Fate's Luck boosting his luck attributes, Giant Slayer rewarding combat against superior enemies, and the titles David's Disciple, Overpowered, and Leviathan Killer, all indicating he eliminated a monster at least 50 levels above his own. The stat sheet revealed a human of Earth alignment, with free stats and Nexus coins available. The reality was clear. The world had transformed into something resembling a video game with absolutely real stakes. He was already at level 16, a position likely reached thanks to the dice roll episode. Among the active quests, the most urgent objective was to reach level 25 to unlock a class, in addition to eliminating 4 heralds and the incursion general. The system also informed him about a spawn point protection mechanism. A pillar of red light visible in the distance seemed to signal the mentioned incursion. Then the system asked whether he was ready to create his first outpost, something Zack immediately interpreted as a base, a place he could call home instead of relying on the fragile remains of the campsite. He accepted. The blue screen disappeared. Nothing grand happened. Confused, he was still processing the silence when a voice surprised him coming from above. A one-eyed spectral creature floated over him, questioning what he was doing there. Zack's instinct fired immediately, axe in hand, ready to act. But before he could do anything, he slipped frantically off the branch. Trying to grab onto anything, his fingers closed around something covered in scales. A second was enough to grasp the size of the problem. He had grabbed the body of a giant snake. With his right arm pinned and the creature rapidly coiling around his entire body, the space to react was almost zero. The snake opened its jaws, aiming at its next meal. Even being crushed, Zack did not back down. Channeling everything he had, he grabbed the snake's head with enough force to literally crush it with his bare hands. His declaration of survival was made, but the branch chose exactly that moment to snap, sending man and snake plummeting down together. From above, the Spectre watched the scene with a mix of disappointment and intrigue. It had commented that this human would never stand a real chance in a place like that, and that an outpost would certainly have improved his odds. At the same time, the creature genuinely could not understand why the human had chosen a simple tree as his installation point. Throughout its long existence filled with experiences, the Spectre had guided countless races and civilizations. Humans, it observed as it drifted away, had always fallen short of expectations in all of them. The idea of setting up a base at the top of a tree was objectively the worst possible decision, and the Spectre wasted no time making that clear. But while the floating being was still processing its judgment, it was met with a scene it hadn't expected. Zack dismembering the body of the snake with the axe, turning the serpent into something resembling a sushi massacre. The Spectre's single eye opened wide at the sight. Then Zack turned and fixed his gaze at it, and the being realized it had made a grave mistake in underestimating that man. With his eyes fixed on the creature, Zack stayed silent as the spirit introduced itself as Veeth Abarak, or simply Abby for anyone who preferred to save syllables. Abby explained that it had been specifically sent to assist the human in choosing and structuring his outpost. Responding with the same seriousness, Zack introduced himself and got straight to the point, questioning what exactly this so-called helping meant. The spirit showed some irritation at realizing that the man before it had not even watched the tutorial. It clarified that an assistant was automatically assigned the moment the user chose the location of their outpost. Zack verbalized his frustration. No tutorial had been presented to him. 3 days ago, he had simply woken up dumped in that forest without any prior explanation whatsoever. Abby was visibly stunned, not only by the fact that there had been no tutorial, but by the information that this man had only been there for 3 days, not months. months. This made the spirit reassess the entire situation, raising the hypothesis that it had been assigned to a challenger, yet another concept completely unknown to Zack. Realizing the extent of the humans' lack of information, Abby decided to explain from scratch. Earth had been integrated into the great multiverse. Countless planets had already existed within this collective structure for billions of years, and Earth's inhabitants were being progressively transferred to tutorial cities to learn and adapt to the new reality. That's when Zack received the first piece of news that truly relieved him. If his family was in any tutorial city, they would be safe. But Abby did not set aside the dark side of the matter either. There was a portion of people incapable of naturally absorbing cosmic energy, and those people were doomed. Any mortal who could not cultivate would inevitably be consumed by the hostile environment the system had created. Zack then asked directly about the role of challengers and whether his fate was to die. Abby explained that challengers were mortals who had accumulated power far beyond what the system expected. The system generally left them to their own devices, expecting them to die naturally. But when someone managed to reverse the odds and survive against all expectations, that someone was literally defying fate itself, and that was exactly where the name came from. In Zack's case, however, his situation was on a completely different scale even within that category. The human made no effort to hide his displeasure. Betting his own life on a dice roll was not exactly what he would call a favorable opportunity. Abby acknowledged the point, but reinforced that the will of the universe weighed more than any individual injustice in the grand scheme of things, and added something important. The system did not tolerate cowards. Any posture of retreat or omission on Zack's part would result in direct punishment. In other words, he had no choice. He would need to complete the quests, eliminate the demons, and the system would accept no negotiation. Abby assured him that was how reality worked for those who received the direct assignment from the system, and that Zack would be closely monitored for an indefinite period. The spirit glanced discreetly around before whispering a valuable tip. Completing the quests in 1 month instead of 3 would bring a far superior reward, but at the exact moment it was about to reveal the details of that reward, it was abruptly expelled from the area by the system itself. The notification that appeared afterward was clear. Abby's access had been revoked ahead of schedule. The system was listening to every word. Even with that interruption, Zack made his decision. He would complete everything in 1 month. The narrative then shifts setting. Amid an aristocratic party, a man with demonic horns observed the room from above with evident disgust. His companion, an elegant woman dressed in red, commented on his sullen expression and asked Ogress to smile. After all, it was a day of celebration. He had just been appointed Incursion General, the greatest honor any member of a clan could receive. But Ogress found no reason to celebrate, not because the title was worthless, but because he hadn't needed to kill anyone to obtain it. His eyes fixed on a man with long, lush hair on the other side of the hall, who stared back at him. The woman, Aya, suggested that perhaps it would be better to prepare for the battles that lay ahead. Ogress taunted her with a smile, saying she didn't know him well enough, because he would never face his enemies head-on. Ogress had a different plan. Let his adversaries believe they had control while he manipulated everything from the shadows, and the proof was happening right there. The moment one of those present drank the wine he had prepared, the poison began to act quickly, trapping the man in a slow and painful death. A woman nearby ran desperately calling for help, unable to understand what was happening. Ogress crossed the hall with calm steps, leaving blood and confusion behind. Someone who preferred to make it look as though his enemies simply destroyed themselves. Back in the forest, a monster was peacefully drinking from a crystal-clear stream when a small butterfly-like creature landed delicately on its snout. The scene was almost touching until the creature sensed a presence approaching from behind and turned around. When it looked forward again, it was too late. Zack had hurled a heavy axe directly into the monster's spine, ending everything with a single devastating blow. The entry was merciless, and the reward came immediately in the form of the Demon Slayer title, which granted a 3% stat increase against any demonic enemy. The system did not make level progression a simple thing. What Zack received were only stat points to distribute manually. Even upon reaching level 17, with 32 free points accumulated, he had resisted spending them, wanting to plan before acting. But the fight against the giant snake had left a bitter lesson. Holding back advantages in that environment was suicide. Reconsidering his approach, Zack distributed the points in a practical and straightforward manner: 10 into strength, 6 into dexterity, 5 into endurance, and 11 into health. Saving resources for later was a pointless strategy, when later might simply never come. With 25 days until the end of the month, he pondered whether he should trust Abby's tip. The conclusion was simple. If the system had silenced the specter before the reward was revealed, it was because the benefit was large enough to be worth it. That meant completing the quests on time was both an opportunity and a veiled obligation. For the first time since arriving on that island, Zack saw the situation from a different angle. He was at the earliest stage of everything, and that was an advantage no one else had. Drinking water from the stream, he made a silent decision. He would not waste this window. He pulled the axe from the carcass and moved on. In that same spot, the small insect that had landed on the monster moments before began feeding calmly on the carcass, a grim reminder of how that world worked. With night falling, Zack sat around the campfire roasting monster meat for dinner. As he chewed, he reflected on the titles he had accumulated. Most of them seemed to have been earned simply by being the first to do certain things in that world. First person to kill a monster, solo incursion slayer general, Leviathan killer, all of them pointed in that direction. Something else intrigued them. When he created the outpost, he received no special reward. That indicated other people had already done the same before him. Other challengers existed, and some might already be far ahead. The snake he had faced had grown powerful at a pace too accelerated to be a coincidence. Somewhere on that island, other humans were also evolving. Browsing the outpost's store section, Zack discovered that items were purchased with Nexus coins, around 100 per kill depending on the monster. Two items in particular caught his attention. The first was a skill called Eye of Discernment, costing 3,000 coins and allowing direct analysis of any creature, an assessment tool to make each hunt more efficient. The first time he activated it, a violent headache hit him full force. The second was an F-grade item with an absurdly long name: Mother-Daughter Small-Scale Collection Set. For the same price, the item allowed passively absorbing an amount of cosmic energy equivalent to that of a demonic dog every 24 hours, including during sleep. It wasn't real cultivation, but it worked. The meditation portion was numbing enough that he finished it quickly and returned to what truly mattered: hunting. And hunting is exactly what Zack began doing in an almost obsessive manner. Ambushes against demonic dogs, direct confrontations, chases through the forest. Each encounter made him more skilled than the one before. He began tracking the creature's movement patterns, identifying tracks, and anticipating routes. The more he hunted, the easier killing became. Over time, Zack refined every movement until axe handling became something almost instinctual. He learned to rotate his body to amplify the force of his strikes, to parry attacks before they reached vital points, and to dodge with economy of movement. Combined with the Eye of Discernment, he began identifying with precision the creatures he had faced, the Barugust, as the system classified them. To never be left without options, he hid resources and supplies strategically all across the island, ensuring he could keep surviving even if cut off from his base. The hunting routine was relentless. Zack dragged each carcass back to camp before heading out again. The fights didn't always go smoothly. There were moments when he returned bloodied and at his limit, but the accumulated kills easily reached into the hundreds, and the higher his level climbed, the more the Baragust ceased to look like predators in his eyes. They were just prey. With level 23 already reached and only 5 days remaining until the end of the first month, Zack knew he needed to push the pace at any cost. On the other side, in the territory of the incursion demons, Ogress received the expected visit from Ryle. The incursion general asked animatedly about the progress of the preparations. Ryle showed evident irritation, reminding him that all the reports had already been sent. Ogress showed no remorse whatsoever. He stated that delegating was precisely the function of a leader, and that was what his second-in-command was there for. Ryle had to swallow the taunt. When invited to sit, Ryle refused. Instead, he picked up a wine goblet and questioned whether Ogress could afford to be drinking at that moment. Ogress grumbled that people kept asking that pointless question. The incursion would still take weeks to reach its next phase. Ryle, seeing the perfect opening, smiled and slid a document across the table, asking him to sign it quickly so he could return to work. Ogress signed without hesitation, assuming it was a simple recommendation for Kevin to join the Master of Scouts. What he didn't know was that this was exactly Ryle's move. Document in hand, the second-in-command said goodbye with a smile too wide to be casual, assuring him he would carry out his master's orders. Ogress praised him for his reliability as the door closed. Only then, alone, a crooked smile formed on his face. He could hardly wait to rid himself of that Baragus den in the weeks ahead. Back in the forest, Zack was following tracks on the ground when he located another demonic dog resting nearby. It was just another ordinary hunt, until the creature, suddenly and without any warning, made direct eye contact with him. Before he could process the shock, the creature was brutally destroyed by something even larger that appeared out of nowhere. Zack froze. He was only a few meters away, and, by luck, had not been detected. But whatever was in front of him was tearing the creature apart as if it were paper. He tried to fall back, but the alpha dog sniffed something in the bushes and turned his gaze toward the spot. It investigated for a moment and found nothing, because Zack was already running with his heart in his throat. That thing was completely different from anything he had faced before. Its size was absurdly larger than any Baragust he had hunted. Confronting it without a plan was unthinkable. The most sensible decision was to pull back to camp and reorganize his strategy. The problem was that when he arrived at camp, he found the place overrun by monsters. Two of them were conversing in an incomprehensible language. To the right was a winged demon with visibly sharp intelligence. To the left, a more instinctual and bestial demonic beast. Zack's first hypothesis was that they had been sent specifically to locate his outpost and report his position. Trying to gather information, he activated the Eye of Discernment. And that was exactly where the plan fell apart. The moment he used the skill, both detected his presence instantly. The four-eyed imp flashed a calculating smile and began charging an energy attack. Zack barely had time to react, forcing his axe forward to try to deflect the shot, and succeeded, though the scene raised serious concerns about that weapon's durability. The relief lasted half a second. The demonic beast launched itself at him from the flank, knocking him down hard. Energy bolts grazed his shoulders as he was still falling. On the ground, Zack shoved the weapon into the monster's mouth and used every ounce of its physical strength to hurl it away. But the fire that had touched his shoulder was something different. Even the minimal contact seemed to corrode something deeper than flesh, as if his very soul was being consumed by those flames. The imp approached with slow, calculated steps, murmuring in a language Zack didn't recognize. To make things worse, the beast snapped the axe in two against one, without a weapon. The odds were terrible, but Zack had no intention of stopping there. He exploded toward the demonic dog at full speed, while the imp fired blasts of fire at his back. He dodged everything, pushed even faster, and reached the beast head-on before it could react. The beast leapt to attack, but Zack brought it down with brute force, pinning the creature to the ground. The beast tried to use its claws and tail to break free, but Zack held on and began hammering with punches, without pause, without hesitation, and without mercy. That was when the imp seized the opening. With Zack pinned on the ground on top of the other monster, it launched the fire orb that hit his back directly. The impact was devastating. Those flames spread inward, as if consuming something beyond the physical. Zack felt his body give, and at that moment, with the beast aiming its tail as a finishing blow, something different happened. Cosmic energy, that force which permeates the multiverse itself, present since the system's arrival, had been accumulating inside Zack throughout all that time. Every monster killed, every level gained, every blow absorbed had fed that silent process. Without him consciously realizing it, his body had learned to feel that energy, to recognize it, and now, at the most critical moment, to use it. The beast's piercing blow struck Zack, and bent. It broke on impact, as if it had met steel. His body pulsed with an orange-purple aura, and currents of electricity crackled through his hands. The rage of having his axe destroyed fueled all of it. The imp fell back for the first time, surprised by what he was seeing, and began launching dozens of fire blasts in sequence in an attempt to contain that human. Zack was already moving. He grabbed the beast's tail and began spinning it at high speed, using the monster's own body as a shield against the imp's projectiles. What followed happened off-screen, but the result was there. On day 30 of the first month, the corpses of the imp and the demonic beast floating lifelessly. Zack had won. Sitting with the axe fragments in his hand, he worked in silence to craft a new wooden handle and restore the weapon. After carefully refining it, he gripped it again as if reuniting with an old partner. He had still not reached level 25 or unlocked the class, but that did not make him slow down. The system rewarded risk, and Zack had already proven he knew how to play that game. Visually, he was nowhere near close to the man who had arrived on that island. Lean, adapted, and sharp as the blade he carried, he moved toward his second herald. On the opposite end of the narrative, Rael confirmed to Ogress that the month had been eventful, but reinforced that this was only the beginning of the real trials. After the portal formed, they would be completely separated from the rest of the clan. That was where the real work would begin. The two stared at the growing rift tearing through the space before them as an army of demons waited eagerly to cross to the other side. The confrontation with Herald Vu, a level 45 monster, began with Zack dodging the first attack and being hit full force by the second, rolling across the ground. As he got back up, an old memory surfaced, a fishing trip with his father when he was still a child. The man had held up a caught fish and talked about how every animal carried an attribute that made it unique. Fish were slippery by nature, but humans in the primitive era used spears, and even against faster prey, they won. Not through brute force, but through the ability to understand, plan, and adapt. That was what made humans different. 2 hours before the confrontation, Zack had prepared a trap as a silent tribute to that lesson. Now he stood face to face with a creature that, under normal circumstances, should have crushed him. The level difference alone made every direct hit potentially fatal. But Zack did not intend to win by strength. He guided Vu through the environment carefully, forcing the creature to make mistakes while ensuring no attack landed on him cleanly. Channeling cosmic energy into different parts of his body, he blocked strikes and powered counterattacks with surgical precision. It was not cultivation, it was pure adaptation. The scene cuts to the demonic territory. The rift in space was widening progressively. Ogress asked for Rael's location, who, by all indications, had already crossed the incursion portal. The commander stepped forward and directed his men, but the revelation that followed was that Ogress would not be going through the portal, as if he had been expecting that move from the very beginning. The general simply smiled at them. Back in the forest, Zack was running at the absolute limit of his strength. The cosmic energy coursing through his body had been overloaded beyond the tolerable threshold, and was beginning to destroy him from within. Even so, with Herald Vu in furious pursuits, stopping simply was not an option. The trap he had prepared hours earlier was already in sight. He just needed a few more seconds. The monster charged forward with brutal speed, closing the distance between them. At the critical instant, Zack channeled a burst of cosmic energy into his feet and shot sideways, swerving around the trap with enough momentum to leave Vu without any reaction time. The herald couldn't stop and plunged headfirst into the structure. The spikes pierced its belly, and one of them split its head open in a terminal blow. Vu was officially defeated, and its energy was absorbed directly by Zack. With that kill, he not only reached level 25, but also completed one of the main quests, unlocking the class system. The joy that washed over him was genuine. It had cost him everything to get there. He taunted the system mentally, celebrating yet another victory. But the celebration was short-lived. From the shadows all around, other silhouettes emerged. It was not an isolated creature. It was an entire pack of demonic dogs, and they all just identified their next meal. In the demonic territory, a rebel group was on its knees begging for mercy. The new general granted them nothing. He tore their heads off without hesitation. Ogress had eliminated all the troublesome elements within his ranks, and his servant asked how long that would continue. The answer was straightforward. It would continue until it was necessary to stop. Even Aya, who had been expecting some form of preferential treatment, realized that Ogress made no distinctions. No one would be able to know the true extent of his plans. Absolute control was the only objective. One of the servants crushed the traitor's throat as Ogress verbalized his weariness. His own planet had become the greatest threat to his dominion. With things resolved internally, all that was left was to personally visit the locations of interest. Back on the island, Zack was running through the forest with his body covered in wounds and his clothes in tatters, with hundreds of demons on his tail. Exhausted and furious, he questioned internally why Abarak had never warned him about any of this. killing a herald was the easiest challenge compared to what came after. The moment the creature died, every monster in the forest was drawn to him like flies to an open wound. His options were running out. The cosmic energy was near its limit, with a large portion already consumed in the confrontation with the herald. Running indefinitely wouldn't solve nothing, and when he slowed down for a fraction of a second, one of the demons nearly tore him apart. He was forced to keep fighting while in motion, even as his stamina approached collapse. That's when he noticed something crucial. With every demon that died, a portion of cosmic energy returned to his body. The solution had been in front of him the whole time. He didn't need to flee, he needed to fight back. He turned to face the horde and committed to a long and brutal battle. In the demonic camp, Riel ordered his men that there was no more time to wait for Ogress. In the general's absence, he took command and instructed Kevin to form a scouting group with the mission of investigating the death of Urkaz, the herald. Kevin confirmed it would be resolved quickly. Riel then began devising strategies to strengthen the outposts under his control, until a messenger burst in frantically reporting movement inside the portal. Seconds later, Ogress crossed the entrance with his group. They too locked eyes with a tension that made them look far more like rivals than allies. Back on the island, Zack crossed the forest slowly, each step marked by the weight of exhaustion. Behind him, the remains of hundreds of demonic dogs served as a silent witness to what had just happened. He found the tree where he had hidden his backup supplies, climbed to a stable branch, and allowed himself to rest for the first time in hours. The night breeze and the soft moonlight against his face pulled him into sleep before he even realized it. Half a day later, he awoke to the sound of birds all around him. The surprise of still being alive after a full month in that place was genuine. Such an intense life seemed to condense an entire existence into just a few weeks. He climbed down carefully, covered his wounds, and was struck by how quickly his body was recovering on its own. The mental exhaustion still weighed heavily, but the prospect of choosing his class on returning to base was fuel enough to keep going. The sound of a snapping branch cut through the silence. Hidden in the bushes, Zack watched a red-haired demonic scout moving through the area. It was the first time he had seen a horned creature up close, and he needed a moment to process that it was real. The demon spoke in an incomprehensible language, but clearly pronounced the name of the second herald while examining the traces around it. After completing the inspection, the creature decided it needed to report immediately to General Ogress, thrilled at the possibility of being rewarded for the discovery. Zack had other plans. With a precise throw, he hurled the axe into the back of the demon's neck and dropped it instantly. He slung the unconscious body over his shoulder and carried it back to base without hesitation. Later, the demon woke up tied to a chair, unable to move. Zack roused it with a bucket of ice-cold water without any ceremony. The creature panicked and began screaming in confusion. To silence it in the most direct way possible, Zack pressed the axe against the demon's neck and introduced himself. The demon called him human in response, proving that communication between the two was possible. The interrogation began with Zack asking directly whether there were more invaders on the island. When he cut the demon's wrist to pressure a response, the demon's body began to pulse red. A massive energy accumulated within it seconds, and the creature screamed that Zack would burn before detonating everything in a violent explosion. Zack managed to escape through the shockwave, but watched in disbelief as everything around him turned to ash. The demon had used all of its own energy to self-destruct rather than reveal any information. That level of loyalty changed the way Zack saw the demons. They were not simply monsters, they were something else entirely. He immediately hid in a tree, waiting for others to come investigate the explosion. When silence returned, he climbed down and looked at the scorched ground, muttering to himself that it was an absurd waste. The demon could have left behind some usable equipment. The only concrete gain was a new axe, since the previous one had been completely destroyed. Regardless, level 25 had been reached. It was time to choose a class. But before opening the selection menu, Zack acquired an item capable of creating illusions and completely concealing his presence. A small box appeared at his feet. He removed the glowing fragments from inside and carefully positioned them all around the camp, one by one. When he placed the last fragment, an imposing purple barrier expanded around everything, erasing any trace of the location's existence from any external sense. Zack was left speechless at the effect. It was as if the camp had never existed. No wandering demon would find it anymore. With the base protected, he opened the menu and selected the class selection command, and was met with a massive error message demanding a Nexus node to proceed. The frustration was immediate and vocal. After venting, he relented and used the 6,000 Nexus coins accumulated over weeks of hunting to purchase the node. A sturdy stone with a glowing crystal at its center arose from the ground before him. Zack touched the enchantment table with his axe, and a new menu opened. 5 available classes appeared before him, all of F grade, the universal starting point for any player. The Fighter, specialized in heavy close-quarters combat, the Acolyte, focused on magic and potions, the Marine, with mastery in aquatic combat, the Demon Hunter, a warrior specialized in tracking and eliminating demonic enemies, and finally, the Lumberjack, someone who uses the forest itself as an extension of themselves. Zack went through the options carefully. The Fighter and the Acolyte were discarded for being too conventional. The Demon Hunter would limit his growth to only one type of enemy. The Marine depended on a specific environment that could not be guaranteed. That left the Lumberjack, and the more he thought about it, the more sense it made. The system seemed to be acknowledging every choice he had made up to that point. The only limitation was the exclusive use of an axe, but Zack had gotten to where he was with exactly that weapon. To him, that wasn't a restriction, it was confirmation. He grabbed the crystal, declared his choice out loud, and the object responded with a growing, intense light. Gusts of wind swirled around his body, glowing veins spread across his skin, and his eyes took on a vivid yellow. Notifications stacked in sequence, new titles, elevated stats, enhanced active abilities. The crystal kept radiating as a wave of yellow energy surged through Zack from head to toe, bringing him to his knees with the impact. When the effect passed, he was drenched in sweat, trembling, and smiling. He was the first person in the entire world to obtain that class. He checked his new stats and saw numbers he barely recognized as his own. Then he looked at his own body and realized he had gained nearly 20 pounds of muscle mass in a matter of seconds. Cosmic energy pulsed through every inch of his being, as if his body had finally found the shape it was always meant to have. Upon checking his new abilities, Zack discovered that most were still locked behind side quests. In that world, absolutely nothing was handed over without effort attached. Gripping the axe with renewed firmness, he was ready to show the demons exactly who they were dealing with. The picture on the demonic side became clearer. Incursions represented an enormous source of wealth and power for them, even with the original plan sabotaged by Ogress's betrayal. The general had used his authority to send smaller groups through the portal instead of mobilizing the full army. In theory, nothing on the island should pose a threat to them. They didn't even know Zack existed. The version circulating among the demons was that the two heralds had most likely destroyed each other after being sent there. Because of all this, the clan had lost an entire month of preparation against real threats, being forced to sacrifice thousands of slaves to appease what they called the heavens. Kevin, for his part, was satisfied with how things had unfolded. During the reconnaissance missions to discover who had eliminated the second herald, his scouts located a Nexus crystal buried deep inside a cave. That stone was worth more than the fortune accumulated by many of the clan's elders over an entire lifetime. Since it was his men who had found it, Kevin had full control over the fate of the money, and he planned to make sure the elders did not see a single coin of it. With the sun beginning to set, Kevin ordered the soldiers to make camp after an exhausting day of marching. He then walked to a hillside with a privileged view and asked his subordinate Kayla whether she appreciated the scenery. His soldiers wasted no time setting up an exclusive table for the two of them. When they sat down, Kayla expressed surprise he found room for something like this in the middle of an incursion. Kevin smiled and replied that he was never too busy for someone he truly cared about. The mood was abruptly broken by insects buzzing nearby. Annoyed, Kevin shouted for his subordinate Gormer to deal with it immediately. No response came. The silence was far too telling. The two turned at the same time and found a stocky human with an axe destroying the poor soldier's back. At first, he seemed like nothing more than some primitive inhabitant of the forest. Kayla fired an arrow to bring him down without hesitation. Zack reacted at the same instant, drawing a throwing knife and splitting the arrow clean in two with surgical precision. Kevin, assuming the human was distracted, swung his great sword. Zack's axe blocked the blow and the shockwave from the impact expanded through the air. Kevin increased the pressure, trying to overwhelm him through brute force, and for the first time time, felt a spark of excitement facing a human with that level of resistance. Even so, he was absolutely confident he could crush him like any other. At the moment the sword pressed with full force against the axe, a third demon named Melius attacked from behind without warning. Zack shifted the sword to the side in a fluid motion and ducked under the blow, leaving Melius swinging at nothing. He then delivered a heavy strike to the demon's chest that drove through to the armor on its back, hurling it away with violence. Kevin attacked again in rage, but Zack repositioned behind him in the blink of an eye and raised the axe to drive it into the commander's back. It was then that a dark energy suddenly enveloped him, paralyzing his body with pain. Kayla seized the opening and fired an arrow into his back. The attack stunned him for a second, enough time for Kevin to deliver what would have been the finishing blow. Even so, Zack blocked at the last instant, leaving the demon genuinely shaken. The idea that such a powerful mortal could exist in a world that had been running for less than a month was beyond his comprehension. Zack grabbed Kevin by the head and aimed for his neck, without noticing the arrow already coming his way. He sensed it approaching at the last second and pulled back just enough for it to graze his face. He wiped the blood with the back of his hand and stared down the commander, making it clear he had absolutely no intention of backing down. Kevin acknowledged the strength displayed with a bitter compliment, but made no effort to hide his contempt for the human race. Trash from another world, too weak to even cultivate cosmic energy, yet clinging to existence with the irritating persistence of mosquitoes. He called Zack a challenger, the same classification Abarak had used, abandoned scum that accumulates power through the system. He admitted the human had come far, but stated that the only mistake made was choosing to challenge him. Kevin swung the sword in a wide arc. Zack leaned back in slow motion, letting the blade pass, and responded with the axe straight into the demon's chest plate, which bounced off without even denting the metal. The shock wave hurled Zack backward. The armor was impenetrable with the equipment he had. Kevin advanced again. This time, Zack hurled the entire table at him. The demon was caught off guard and destroyed everything: snacks, furniture, and the romantic dinner atmosphere with an enraged blow. Through the blind spot that opened, Zack launched the axe and sent Kevin reeling. One of the guards ran towards his superior, who screamed not to take their eyes on the enemy, but too late. Zack had already cut the soldier's head off before the warning reached him. Kevin's eyes went wide as he dodged the next blow by millimeters. In response, he knocked Zack down and pinned him to the ground. The two locked into a brutal stalemate, each trying to strike each other's face. Kevin shouted for Kayla to fire immediately and drew a hidden knife from behind his waist and drove it into Zack's side. The cry of pain was unavoidable. The blue-haired demon smiled, convinced he had won, and began strangling the human while twisting the blade in the wound with cold precision. Zack reached slowly for the axe. Kevin kept taunting him, questioning where all that earlier arrogance had gone. The answer came in the form of metal, the blade driven directly into the demon's neck. The system confirmed the level up. Zack pushed the corpse aside and struggled to get back on his feet. Kayla already had another arrow knocked in the bow, warning him not to take another step. He did. The arrow pierced the joint of his shoulder. The demoness repeated the warning and sure she would make him pay with suffering. Zack stared at her with total indifference, his eyes drifting slowly down to the knife still buried in his own stomach. Moments later, Kayla's vital signature was ended. Zack searched the bodies for loot. He was hoping to find something better than last time, since the previous demon had decided to self-destruct along with everything it was carrying. Among the items, a small glowing pouch caught his attention, far too heavy for its size. Upon opening it, he discovered a dimensional storage item with the equivalent of an entire room compacted inside. Food, furniture, supplies. Zack questioned internally whether the demons were planning an incursion or a leisure trip. Among the items was a set of unusually looking crystals. The system identified them: Nexus crystals, loaded with cosmic energy, absorbable over time to accelerate level progression. Zack felt the dense energy compacted within them before reading the description. They were F grade, the same ones listed as a reward in one of his active quests. Equipped with the new gear and a dimensional pouch clipped to his belt, he cast an ironic glance at the bodies around him, mentally thanking them for the gifts. Kevin's sword had no direct use for him, but he kept it so it wouldn't fall into enemy hands. Opening the status screen, Zack assessed the progress of the quests. 1 month since the start of the incursion, 2 of the 4 heralds eliminated. The imp and one still unknown remained. There was also the incursion general to finish off. Since he didn't know the location of the 2 remaining heralds, the only obvious option was to go straight for the general. The red light beacon pulsed on the horizon like a target impossible to ignore. The attempt to enter the demonic territory came at a steep cost. Over 100 demons were cut down before Zack pulled back, acknowledging that the enemy's numerical strength was simply too great to overcome head-on. The gates were impenetrable in his current state. The guards positioned in every direction had already intercepted him once. A patrol circled constantly between the outposts and the mountains, likely mining resources, and the largest contingent was inside the fortress itself. What surprised him was realizing after observing the demons closely that they were not simple NPCs. They had distinct personalities, their own conversations, unique behaviors. They were real people, possibly trapped there the same way he was. But that didn't change the calculation. That island was his home now, and anyone who threatened that would be treated as an enemy. Zack had no intention of backing down until he found a way back to his family, and he would cut down every demon of that lineage if necessary. The plan changed. First, the 2 remaining heralds, then Ogress's head. The problem was that for several days in a row, neither of them appeared. Zack used the time sweeping the island's edges, hunting sea monsters on the beaches, and diving through cave systems, progressively increasing his axe mastery with each confrontation. When he finally scaled the highest cliffs to get a full view of the territory, he realized he had been searching in the wrong places from the very beginning. That was when he spotted something unusual. A strange beast was resting casually on a protruding branch on the mountain slope. The 2 stared at each other in silence, both equally confused by what they had in front of them. Then, out of nowhere, the primate panicked. Zack immediately activated the Eye of Discernment. It was one of the remaining heralds, the stone monkey. The creature's eyes lit up in an intense orange hue. It leapt from its perch and shot towards Zack at full speed. Zack didn't wait for the creature to reach him. He shot toward the stone monkey and cut it clean in half with a single horizontal blow before the primate could even react. His axe mastery and nexus points rose once again. Thinking quickly, he concluded that those beasts had probably never left their natural territory, which explained why he had never crossed paths with them before. For a moment, he considered pushing deeper into the mountains in search of more of them. The thought was interrupted by furious screams spreading all around him. An entire pack of the creatures was descending toward him from above. Without the slightest hesitation, Zack drew the axe and went to meet them. As he cut his way through the monkeys, his mind drifted over the events of the past few weeks. In the beginning, everything was pure chaos, not understanding the world, no news from his family, no direction. But as he advanced, leveled up, and eliminated each enemy that appeared, the pieces gradually fell into place. The conclusion he reached was straightforward. All of his enemies were part of that forest, and he was the lumberjack. And the lumberjack's job was to cut down everything in the way. In the middle of the battle, his axe mastery finally reached its maximum level. And then something unexpected happened. Zack was transported to another place, an environment that seemed pulled from an ancient fantasy. Before him rose a vast castle enveloped by dense vegetation, with colossal cities floating in the sky in the distance. Armies of angels and golden giants marched toward him with a power that filled the horizon. Before he could process everything, he realized he was not alone. Standing beside him was a lumberjack, bald, muscular, wielding a massive axe with absolute ease. The man breathed in deeply, raised the weapon above his head, and brought it down with devastating force. Bolts of electricity concentrated around the blow, and the purple energy wave released obliterated the army of angels as if they were shadows. Zack mirrored the movement instinctively, swinging his own axe against the remaining forces. The blade touched the ground, and his hands, along with the weapon, pulsed with an intensity he had never felt before. When he returned to reality, he was leaning against a tree atop a pile of stone monkey carcasses. The system informed him that he had acquired the power of the heaviness of the Tao. The reference to Eastern mythology surprised him. He hadn't expected something like that to have real existence. Even without fully understanding what it was, he felt the power flowing through him like something that had always been meant to be there. The vision had left a clear impression. Comparing his previous strikes to what he had witnessed, he realized there was something fundamentally off balance in his technique. The man in the vision hadn't simply struck with weight. There was an intention, a truth behind each movement that his attacks did not yet possess. Holding the axe, Zack imagined the true weight behind a strike and let that feeling flow slowly into the movement. When the blade lightly touched the ground, the earth split without effort. It was more than anything he had done before, but it was still far from what he had seen. There was far more to the Tao that he did not yet understand, and he knew that reaching that peak would take time. The system then revealed something that shifted his perspective. He was the third person so far to achieve enlightenment. He was not the only genius in that world. With the first month of tutorial already over, Zack wondered how many others were out there and how quickly humanity had begun to rebuild itself while he was trapped on that island. The anger he felt was not from defeat, it was from motivation. He had been ahead the whole time, and this was the first moment he realized he might be falling behind. Strength was the only currency that would matter in the new world, and he had no intention of losing his value. Looking at his active quests, he realized he had been so focused that he hadn't even noticed one of them was about to be completed. At the incursion base, Ogress demanded to know what Kevin had done this time. A soldier reported that the blue-haired demon was dead, possibly by the same group that had eliminated the other two previously. Ogress could barely contain his laughter, turning his face away from his subordinate to let the laugh out in silence. One of the most irritating thorns in his path had decided to go get itself killed on its own. Regaining his composure, he apologized, attributing the reaction to allergies from the new atmosphere. Internally, there was a slight irritation. Kayla, his trusted informant, had also been eliminated. Even so, he was satisfied. He ordered the soldier to send troops to support Cinderine and Kugo, acknowledging that the enemy was more formidable than they had calculated. Deep down, he was hoping that Ryle and the local fighters would destroy each other without him needing to get his hands dirty. Ilv interrupted his thoughts by pointing out that he was smiling suspiciously again, and received a blunt silence as a response. Back on the island, Zack was felling tree after tree at a steady and methodical pace. With the last branch cut, the progress quest was completed and he leveled up. Then he climbed the cliffs again and came across a new group of stone monkeys. He shouted in their direction and the entire pack came down in a fury. Zack channeled the cosmic energy inward, waited for the primates to close in, and drove the blade into the ground. The resulting shockwave reduced them to rubble before any of them got close. But he didn't stop there. Something in the mountains was calling to him, an intuition that there was more hidden as he climbed higher. The cosmic energy grew denser with altitude, and the stone monkeys themselves grew progressively stronger and more organized. They began patrolling in groups, some of them with an identifiable leader, the largest and most imposing of the pack. None of them, however, could pose a real threat to Zack, who eliminated them without hesitation as he continued his ascent. Days passed without finding the Herald. It was only when he looked down into the valley that the answer appeared. The Herald wasn't hidden at the top, it was down below. Sliding down the slope toward the valley, Zack's eyes went wide. The surrounding environment had been devastated somehow, and meditating at the center of it all was a figure that seemed pulled straight from mythology, a being with the appearance of Wukong, nearly at level 60. It was Cinderine. Zack attacked as he descended, aiming for a blow that should have ended everything right there. But Cinderine opened its eyes at the last instant and blocked the blade with its bare hands. Zack pressed down with all his strength, but the Herald would not yield. The monkey's eyes lit up yellow, cosmic energy concentrated in the axe it was folding, and it hurled Zack into the ground with brutal force. Zack got back up immediately and took a few steps back. He held his chest and smiled. That was a real Herald. Even having tripled his strength, achieved enlightenment, a new class, and new abilities, Cinderine had intercepted the axe with bare hands. It was incomparably superior to the previous two. The two began circling each other in silence. Zack took the first step and advanced. Cinderine raised its leg and launched the colossal stone wave straight ahead. Zack cut through it and kept advancing, leaping over the fragments and swung the blade toward the monkey's head. The Herald ducked fluidly and dodged, responding with claws aimed at the neck. Zack parried and countered with a straight punch to the face. Cinderine slashed back with a cut that opened the wound. Blood sprayed from both of them as the combat spread across the entire area. It was during a quick advance that Zack noticed something. Cinderine had deliberately positioned itself in front of him, blocking the path, not to attack, but to prevent him from reaching a specific nearby tree. The smile that formed on Zack's face was that of someone who had just won the game before it ended. He faked a direct attack at the tree to confirm the suspicion. Cinderine panicked and lunged forward, putting its own body between the axe and the tree. The plan had worked. Zack pulled a blow and redirected it. The herald tried to hold it back with one hand, but could barely hold on. Zack commended it for its determination to protect what was its own, and then pulled his arms back and began delivering blow after blow, pushing Cinderain progressively backward, giving it no room to react. With no way out, the herald let out a cry that echoed across the entire span of the mountains. Zack went on immediate alert. The other monkeys had heard. He tried to end the fight before they arrived, but a stone struck the back of his head with force, forcing a retreat. Holding his head in anger, he calculated his options. Pushing forward with the wounds he had and his cosmic energy nearly at its limit would be suicide. Pulling back meant losing the chance of a one-on-one confrontation with Cinderain, which was unlikely to happen again. Both choices left him trembling with frustration as he stared at the taunting smile at the herald's face. He chose to pull back. He ran through the forest with the pack in pursuit, the stone monkeys calling for reinforcements from every direction as they leapt through the trees behind him. That was when he spotted a cave to the left and dove inside without hesitation, stopping with a slide and looking at the horde closing in through the entrance. He closed his eyes. What he was about to do was a terrible idea, and he knew that with complete clarity. But if he wanted to survive and have another chance at Cinderain, there was no alternative. He lowered the axe, concentrated everything that remained of his cosmic energy into the blow, and brought the blade down with maximum force. A monumental avalanche of rocks collapsed onto the stone monkeys outside. Inside the cave, Zack remained completely still, calm, waiting. Leaning against a corner of the cave, Zack muttered to himself. Even after all the power he had acquired, he had still ended up trapped in that dark place. The only consolation was knowing where one of the last heralds was located, so all he needed was to find a way out. As he stood up, he wondered whether that place might have some connection to the mines where the demons worked. Since there was only one way to find out, he went deeper. Moving through the stone corridor, he pressed his hand against the wall and immediately noticed something. The cosmic energy was considerably denser there, similar to the sensation he had felt at the top of the mountain peaks. He picked up a rock from the ground and began to suspect, could the fourth herald be dwelling inside the mountains? After all, he had already searched the entire island without finding any trace of it. It was then that something made him act on instinct. Zack threw himself behind a rock and stayed silent as a creature passed through the passage, a monster moving in some direction with determined steps. When the creature stopped and looked around, Zack noticed what it was carrying. Nexus crystals. That genuinely surprised him, as he had never imagined that type of monster would have any use for the crystals. A subtle smile crossed his face. All he had to do was follow the creature to the source of those fragments. The plan, however, did not last long. Something rushed past Zack and lunged at the green monster, devouring it in an instant. The plan fell apart. The new creature looked like a lizard, and suddenly it stopped completely, as if it had detected something. The next instant, it leapt toward the protagonist, who simply split it in two with a single motion, without any apparent effort. He picked up a crystal from the ground, tossed it into his bag, and decided to follow the imp's tracks for as long as possible. After walking for quite a while, a strong smell filled the air. Zack realized that all he had to do was follow that unbearable odor to get where he wanted. And he wondered, ironically, if those creatures had ever heard of bathing. But the smell was not the only thing growing stronger as he approached. The sound also increased progressively. It soon became clear the demons were mining Nexus crystals, which, Zack muttered to himself, were his. At that very moment, voices echoed through the passage. With little room to choose, Zack stood still and assessed the environment as three demons appeared. One of them was complaining about the supervisor, while another reprimanded him, warning that she might hear. The first one didn't care. He claimed that at that distance, she wouldn't even hear a scream. He added that he had kept a good amount of crystals for himself and questioned, with impatience, why his companions seemed so frightened. One of them even dropped his pickaxe in fright. What none of the three noticed was the exact moment one of them was split in two. The other two tried to flee, but Zack wouldn't let them. With a lunge, he reached the second one and eliminated him the same way. The last one nearly escaped. He was struck by a knife in the back, but Zack was right on his heels. The creature tried to scream, but it was already too late. Zack exhaled with relief. They had barely failed to alert their companions. When he raised his eyes ahead, however, he understood that the warning would no longer be necessary. He was in the demon's lair. Dozens of eyes turned toward him at the same time. The two superior demons moved into combat positions. The four-eyed demons tried to make sense of what was happening, and the level 44 demon mage was left literally speechless. Zack, for his part, found it almost convenient. It seemed the fourth herald was right there in front of him. The mage reacted first, firing a burst of purple flames. Zack dodged and immediately charged at the shield-wielding demon, whose block was deflected. At the same moment, the demoness was preparing to attack from behind. Zack noticed her, evaded the strike, and in one sharp motion, smashed her head against her companion's shield. The mage tried to intervene by hurling his flames at the group, and Zack apologized with a smile on his face as he used the two of them as a springboard. Leaping upward, the flames swept exactly where he had been a second before, consuming both demons. Upon landing, Zack reflected that this was no ordinary fire. Creatures of that type tend to be lethal at range, but relatively vulnerable in close combat. If the mage followed the same pattern, the strategy was clear: get close and leave no room. He began to advance, eliminating obstacles in his path while dodging the purple bursts, all while mentally questioning whether that creature was even aware it was setting its own allies on fire. He also took the opportunity to notice what was bubbling in the cauldron at the center of the room. Zack dodged a few more explosions, but noticed that getting closer was proving harder than he had calculated. In a moment of distraction, he found himself directly in the mage's line of fire, who let out a cackle before unleashing a massive explosion of purple flames. The smile faded from the demon's face when Zack emerged from the flames unscathed. He recalled the armor he had taken from another demon some time ago, capable of blocking and redirecting received attacks, and to his satisfaction, it worked equally well with fire. He seized the opening and went on the counterattack, but the mage managed to dodge. The result was considerable burns. Zack lost his hair in the process, and he began coughing up blood. He noticed that the smell coming from the cauldron was affecting his concentration, and then he realized the mage was fleeing. That enraged him. Zack refused to let the creature escape. He concentrated every last reserve of energy and unleashed it all in a single attack, screaming as the projectile cut the mage in two. Immediately, a system notification announced a level up, but Zack could barely breathe. His lungs felt like they were on fire. The remaining demons around him seemed equally affected. The smell from the cauldron had taken over the environment in a dangerous way. Without thinking twice, he grabbed the magic bag and shoved the pot inside it, afraid the odor might spread throughout the entire mountain. Before his eyes, the mage's body vanished in the blink of an eye. As he left the cave, Zack felt something was wrong with him. The sensation was that of being sick, and before he could reason about what it might be, his knees gave out. He spat more red liquid and collapsed to the ground.